Okay, hi everybody, Radical Gardener. All right, so this is part 2 with Dave Borwick. And when I get a chance, I'm loading these on one by one, but when I get a chance, I'm going to go back and put Dave's contact information. If for some reason you've missed that, you can always email me or leave a message, at the bottom of these videos. And, ask me how to get a hold of him, because he does charts and he's fantastic. Of course, that can all be done long distance. All right, so let's go to part 2. So let's talk about horary astrology. So let me just say that I use that a lot with Dave. For example, moving to Florida, is that a good move for me? And just asking specific questions about how an area might work. Or is this a good time to start a business? Or when is a good time, right? That would be another thing. Yep. Or people use horary astrology to determine when someone was born. A lot of people don't have their birth information. So I know my mother did that. And God, that was accurate. You knew because it just perfectly described who you were,
Chart rectification.
Yeah, having your chart rectified.
Numerous methods. I use one, and I've been pretty good with it. I get lucky with it 90% of the time. But there's other methods, and there's one method. Nobody, even in the professional groups I belong to, nobody's using it. You know why? Because it's a lot of work.
Yeah,
However,
it's hard.
When you look at the examples and Lilly is the one that proposes this method. William Lilly died in 1647. When you look at the method and you look at the examples he gives, he can nail down when you got that scar on your right cheek to the week. 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So I love that method. It is a lot of work, but nobody else is using it. I'll love spending the time, making the effort to learn, and then hopefully master that technique so that I can be that accurate, and that'll be part of my reputation.
So let me just so people understand the enormity of knowing astrology and really being. I mean, how long have you been practicing astrology?
I started in 1972. My mom went to the store, bought one of those silly Dell books about
her sun sign.
And I'm like, what's that? And she goes, it's astrology. There's something, I don't know, there's something to it, but it's not, And so I read it, and I was fascinated, and then of course I bugged her because I was always getting her to buy books for me. And she got me one for my sun sign. And she got one for all the kids. So she exposed all of us kids when we were young to it. And I just kept on bugging her. I wanted more. So for my 17th birthday, she got me a large hardbound book like this and said, here you go. And I'm sure she thought that would keep me busy for a year, and it lasted like 2 months, and I wanted more. So that was the beginning of my journey to study astrology, and I originally did it just because I wanted to become a better human being. I never intended to do readings for anybody. I heard about that, but I just wanted to study astrology to learn how to accent my strengths, learn how to diminish my weaknesses, and be a better person. And then over time, people say, hey, you're really kind of good at it, because you're practicing on friends and family.
Yeah, sure.
And people push you. And of course, you discount what your friends and family say. But I had a beautiful woman, very smarter than me, better looking than me, a master's degree in psychologist. We were going to get married. And she pulled a trick on me. I did a reading on her, and she was blown away. She was a psychologist with 10 homes, worked with the developmentally disabled adult population. So huge heart, very giving. And she played a trick. One day she invited 2 of her friends that I'd never met over for dinner. And she's like, honey, we're going to have a dinner party. And I'm like, cool. So I made one of my favorite dishes. Everybody's having a good time. And right after dinner, she goes, okay, now you're going to do a reading. And I'm like, no, honey, we're having a good time. Do a reading. And so I did a reading. They were blown away. She was blown away again. And afterwards, she said to me, you need to quit your job and do this. And I said, nobody that practices astrology, everybody has a day job. So how many, but she's the one that finally, because I had so much respect for her intelligence, and she goes, you can see things in 30 minutes that would take me 1.5 years or 2 years to get out of a client. You need to do this because you'll help people.
Can you imagine if they used astrology?
Yeah, I can. So
and then doctors could use it for health.
That's, when you look at Hippocrates, and if you study Hippocrates, one of the hardest things to do with Hippocrates is to find his unedited works. Because when you do, what you'll see is Hippocrates was an astrologer. And when he taught medicine, right? He was training physicians on the Isle of Kos at a place he called the Dream Institute. And he said, if you think you are going to become a physician and not know astrology, not only will you fail, you are an idiot. You have to know astrology, and astrology can't cure anything. What astrology does,
diagnostic.
It's diagnostic. It locates the source of the patient's complaint, of the symptom they're having.
And if it just in general terms, you can say, well, Cancer, that rules the stomach. Libra, that rules the gallbladder. I mean, we all have kidneys, right? And of course, my weakness, gallbladder, kidneys. So, I mean, just in general
you can see
terms,
how a person is predisposed to
absolutely.
certain kinds of...
exactly.
The other thing that Hippocrates said was there's a thing called a world chart where you run it, and it was based in London because that was where Greenwich Mean Time originated. But they ran what was called a world chart, which was the moment that the sun entered the sign of Aries, which is the vernal equinox, right? And he said, here's the other reason why you need to know astrology. Back then, physicians used to give their services primarily for free. And they traveled, right, from one town or one state to another. And he said, the reason to study astrology is that you run a world chart from the location you're going to be at, or the locations, and you can tell from the vernal equinox what kind of illness that city is going to have for that year. So that's what you pack your bag with, things that will cure or heal these people that are afflicted with this. It was common sense. Don't be an idiot. Study astrology. You'll know what to carry in your doctor's bag. But it's hard to find his unedited works. It's littered with references to astrology and why a physician should know it and understand it. It was diagnostic primarily, but when they traveled, they had to know what kind of illnesses they were going to run into.
Well, since they don't study nutrition, you'd think they need astrology.
Oh my God,
that's saying.
One of the things we talked about it briefly. You said something about what it would take to be an astrologer, and I have to remind my students of this because they do struggle in the very beginning. It's hard to get off the ground.
It's really hard.
Planet signs, houses, and angles or aspects, and you have to have that part memorized in order to get to the next level. But I say, remember what it took to become an astrologer back in that day. For instance, in Lily's day, you had to be privileged enough to go to primary school, and then you had to be even more privileged to get to university. That was a big deal back then. Not everybody had enough of an education, and there weren't community colleges scattered all over the place. So often, if you went to university, you were traveling to a different country. So in addition to your own tongue, you had to learn another foreign language to be able to get around in that country. Then you had to study astronomy, mathematics, Greek, Latin and Arabic. Why? Because there were no astrological texts unless they were written in Greek, Arabic, or Latin. After you studied all that, mathematics, astronomy, Greek, Latin, Arabic, another language maybe to get along, then you could study astrology.
So how does horary work?
Horary is one of the differences between modern astrologers and traditional astrologers. In astrology, there are what we refer to as 4 branches, all right? And they work in a hierarchy method. The foundation for astrology is horary, Horary. It's a Latin term meaning basically of the moment or of the hour, and it's casting a chart, a birth chart, so to speak, for a question. Horary is what was practiced by and large with all the old dead guys because we didn't have accurate birth times all the time for people.
Oh, sure, right.
After horary, you get to electional, which basically uses a lot in horary to then start making predictions on when is the best time for a specific action. Whether it's getting married or getting rid of the rats in the basement, there's a specific time that would be better. The evidence for that is everybody has done. I've tried and tried and tried, failed and failed and failed, did the exact same thing, boom, and it worked. Why? Because the astrological timing was there. Whether you realize it or not doesn't matter to me. But when people say, when I recommend what sounds like to them, and frankly sometimes to me, a crazy action, they're shaking their head. No, I already tried that. And I'm like, yeah, but you didn't try it when the planets were in this position. Try it now. And they resist me, but they try it, and they call me up and they're laughing or crying.
And they're going to try it because they're supposed to. Get it, gang?
Yeah.
They're going to try it because that's what's in line for them. So no matter how much you say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm telling you, you're going to be doing it. That was
then, this is now.
Yeah, exactly.
And you know, even great books like the Bible would say there is a time for everything. That's a reflection of what astrological tenets basically believe. I don't care how many times you tried it before. Right now is the time when if you try it, if you put energy into that activity, you will find great success. That's simple. Horary, Electional, and then comes Natal, and then after that is Mundane, talking about states or cities or great dynasties, you know, in families.
That's
and
what
stuff
my
like that.
mother
Weather.
loved.
Yeah, weather. Oh, that's all
mundanism.
mundane. Each one is progressively harder. Well, one of the differences between a traditional artist and a modern is moderns only practice natal. They jump right in at level number 3, which is why they don't understand, because they haven't studied the first 2. They don't understand. And because they won't read and study, they just make shit up as they go along.
You know what? This is so funny because it's so true in everything. You have so much to say, so I really don't want to interrupt too much. But I swear to God, you guys, it's like anything. You've got to know its history. I mean, the same goes for music. I mean, I'm constantly telling people, like, they'll bring in, let's just give me an example. Diana Krall singing Fly Me the Moon. I go, well, have you heard, you know, Joe Stafford? Have you seen Peggy Lee sing? Have you heard Frank Sinatra singing? Have you heard, you know, like, let's go back to who wrote it, who was the first one that sung it. Was it, you know, it's like, you know, how can you know what R&B is if you don't know what R&B in the 50s was, if you don't know who Louis Jordan was, if you don't know who, you know, if you don't know where R&B came from, which is the blues, and where was the blues from, and what a lot of people don't know is that the blues is probably a combination of coming from the Caribbean, a combination of the black and the Irish who were sold into slavery, and their cultures came together, which is why blues is so universal and people really, like, they really hear it and feel it. So there's a history that needs to be known, so that when you go to sing today's music, where the hell does it come from? And how can you have great phrasing? And how can you, if you don't go back and study who was before you? So I listened to all those people that, you know, all the singers back in you know, Mamie Smith and Bessie Smith, and even, you know, people, women singers and male singers that weren't very well known, but that was where I could get a grip. And
provides context.
It really does. It really does. And plus, you seep in that amazing information, and it becomes a part of your style. So continuing.
Okay, so again, one of the differences, because people always ask a common question: what makes you different? Well, first of all, I work in all 4 branches of astrology, not just natal. There's a lot of things that a natal chart can never tell you. I don't care. Transits, progressions, it doesn't work. And in that case, horary works. For instance, if a man like a common question would have been, a guy comes into Astrologer and he says, hey, my cow is missing. Did it wander off, or was it stolen? And in what direction can I go to look for it? That would have been a legitimate and not unusual question for one of the old dead guys to answer. Modern astrology can't answer that question. They have no reference because they've never studied, they've never worked to understand the foundational tenets of astrology. And then, of course, because they don't study, modern astrologers, if you ever hear, oh, there's a Mercury Retrograde, or oh, there's a void of course moon, modern astrologers only have 2 tools to explain what traditional bad shit happens to good people all the time. Modern astrology only has 2 tools to analyze that: a void of course moon or a Mercury retrograde. They blame everything pretty much on just those 2 things.
All Mercury retrogrades are is an opportunity to go back
3 times a year it happens.
Yeah.
It's the universe saying, I want you to slow down for
slow
just
down
a minute.
And go back and clean this up. Wherever that Mercury retrograde is taking place in your chart, or in
often the Mercury retrograde is in some inactive part in your chart, and it's meaningless.
Oh, I've experienced it. Everything's falling apart, and I'm just...
So the moderns are going, oh, be careful, Mercury retrograde is going to screw this up and screw that up, and people are going, well, it's not screwing with me. That's because it's not happening in an active. But so because they won't study, they have a tendency to blame everything on a Mercury retrograde or avoid a course moon. And I'm not saying that those two things can't cause maliciousness.
That's just,
They can, but it has to be another context for that to happen. And so I have 1,000 tools in my toolbox for shitty things that can happen.
Yeah.
And I study them. Modern astrology has 2 that they're equipped with. They forget the first 2 levels of astrology, so they don't understand the foundation. They jump right in at natal and they attempt to answer questions that the natal chart is not qualified to answer. Horary is the biggest tool. And in fact, when I look at a transit chart, which is a comparison of where the planets are at today to where they were when you were born, there are things you can tell. There's trends and things that are trending or things that are becoming a theme in your life. Sometimes on some transits, I can get specific. But usually, I will run a progress chart to see if the testimony is repeated, or at least in the same theme. Then I will run what's called a solar return, which every year the sun comes back around to the exact same spot it was at the moment you were born. Same degree, same minute, same second. Astrologers will cast a chart for that moment in time. The rest of the planets are sprayed around the chart wherever they're at, but we use that chart to analyze a year at a time. And the year that I'm referencing is birthday to birthday. It's not a calendar January, December reference.
Right.
So I look at the natal chart to see how you're predisposed. Then I look at transits to see how it's affecting that predisposition. Then I'll look at a progress chart to see if there's repeating themes or repeating testimonies. And then I'll look at the solar return looking at this year. I even have clients that I'm working with more and more, which I'm real happy about. In every year, there are 13 lunar returns.
Oh, yeah. So that's a whole discussion. I'm all about that.
But to see the patterns.
Yeah.
And how they go.
And that's why we're not in sync with the universe.
We're not.
Because we're in a 12-month calendar. Yeah. Pope Gregory, thank you for that and taking out all the magical solfeggio tones of our musical scale, you creep. Yeah. Anyway, so we're going to break here. So we're going to break here. We're going to come back for part 4. Isn't this fascinating? Even I'm learning stuff. I've been around it all my life. Okay, so Radical Gardener, my garden to yours, or my astrologer to yours. So I'm sending you to love. Okay, all right, we'll be back. Bye.